My friends, we live in a world that elevates the tangible, the immediate, the visible. The flesh, this wonderful but frail vessel in which we dwell, is lauded as though it were the pinnacle of human existence. Yet I ask you, what profit is there in exalting the flesh, if, in doing so, we lose sight of the spirit? Let us explore this matter, not as those seeking to condemn the body, but as those yearning to understand its proper place. Human beings are complex creatures, living in a state of tension between two seemingly opposing forces, the flesh and the spirit. The flesh in this context refers not just to our physical bodies, but also to the desires, passions, and impulses that come with being human. These are the needs and wants that drive us to seek pleasure, comfort, recognition, and survival in the world around us. On the other hand, the spirit is that part of us that yearns for something beyond the material, the temporary, and the transient. It is the part of us that seeks meaning, purpose, and connection with the divine, often pushing us to rise above the mundane and the earthly in favor of something eternal and transcendent. The tension between these two aspects of our being is not merely philosophical, it is deeply personal and existential. Every person experiences it in one form or another. The flesh demands attention and gratification. It craves food, warmth, rest, and sensual pleasure, and it seeks comfort and security. These desires are often loud and persistent, so much so that they can dominate our thinking and guide our decisions. Down to the last moment, the loss of control overwhelms and destroys us. The spirit, however, whispers. It speaks in quieter tones, calling us to higher things, to love, to forgiveness, to self-sacrifice, and to a purpose that transcends the here and now. The problem arises when the flesh is given too much power and begins to overshadow the voice of the spirit. When the flesh is exalted, when we allow our physical desires to dominate our actions and our thoughts, we lose sight of the deeper dimensions of our existence. The need for food, for example, is not inherently wrong, nor is the desire for rest or for companionship. These are fundamental human needs. However, when these desires become all-consuming, when we start to define ourselves solely by what we want and how we feel in the moment, we reduce ourselves to nothing more than biological machines reacting to stimuli. In such a state, our higher aspirations and spiritual yearnings are drowned out by the demands of the body. This duality between the flesh and the spirit is not something new or modern. It has been a theme of human existence for centuries. In fact, it is a central concern in many religious and philosophical traditions. In Christianity, for instance, the Apostle Paul writes about the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. He says, "For the flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit, and the spirit what is contrary to the flesh." Galatians 5:17. Paul's words capture the inherent conflict between the immediate, temporal desires of the flesh and the lasting, transcendent desires of the spirit. The flesh and the spirit are not neutral forces. They are in opposition to one another, pulling us in different directions. The Spirit calls us to rise above the baser instincts of the flesh and to live in alignment with a higher calling. To fully grasp this tension, we must recognize that the flesh is not inherently evil. It is part of our humanity, and its desires, when kept in proper balance, are not to be demonized. The flesh allows us to experience the world in rich and vibrant ways. It is through the body that we experience love, joy, beauty, and even pain, emotions that are integral to our human journey. The issue arises when we become enslaved by the flesh, when it begins to dictate the course of our lives and becomes the sole arbiter of our decisions. Exalting the flesh means allowing it to take priority over the spirit. It means living as though the physical world and its pleasures are the highest good, and that everything else, moral, intellectual, and spiritual pursuits, are secondary. This is the root of many of the problems we face in the modern world. Our society, for example, often encourages us to worship the body. We are bombarded by images of physical perfection in the media, and we are told that success, happiness, and fulfillment are tied to how we look, how much we weigh, how much we can consume, and how much we can indulge in pleasure. The pursuit of these desires is often framed as a pathway to personal freedom and self-actualization. Yet paradoxically, the more we indulge the flesh, the less free we become. The flesh, when exalted, becomes a tyrant, demanding more and more, while leaving us spiritually bankrupt. The tension between the flesh and the spirit is also evident in our intellectual and emotional lives. Our minds, too, are prone to the desires of the flesh. We seek knowledge and understanding. But how often do we pursue these things merely for the sake of status or power, rather than for the sake of truth or moral development? Our intellectual pursuits can easily become another avenue for the flesh to assert its dominance. We seek accolades, recognition, and influence, and in doing so we may lose sight of the higher purpose of knowledge itself. The emotional realm is similarly susceptible to the same dynamic. We experience love, joy, anger, fear, and a host of other emotions, and it is tempting to give them free rein. We often act on our emotions, allowing them to shape our decisions without questioning their motivations. The flesh, in this case, is not just our bodies, but also the emotions that arise from our desires. A person may seek emotional fulfillment through relationships or fleeting moments of pleasure, never fully addressing the deeper needs of the soul that call for true love, peace, and reconciliation. Thus, the task before us is not to reject the flesh or to deny our humanity. Rather, it is to find balance and harmony between the flesh and the spirit. The spirit must guide and inform the desires of the flesh. When the spirit is in control, the body becomes a vessel through which we can serve others, glorify God, and fulfill our higher calling. But when the flesh is exalted and the spirit is ignored, we lose our way. We become slaves to our impulses and desires, rather than free beings capable of choosing the good, the true, and the beautiful. In conclusion, the tension between the flesh and the spirit is a central feature of the human condition. The flesh is not to be despised, but neither is it to be exalted. It is a servant, not a master. It must not dominate our lives, but neither should it be denied its rightful place. The challenge lies in learning to live in such a way that the spirit guides and shapes the flesh, directing it toward the fulfillment of our higher purpose. Only then can we truly live as the beings we were meant to be. The illusion of self-sufficiency is one of the most dangerous traps that modern human beings can fall into, especially in a world that constantly praises individual achievement, personal autonomy, and self-reliance. In our age of technology, innovation, and material abundance, it is increasingly easy to believe that we are the sole architects of our destiny. We can control so many aspects of our lives, our education, our careers, our appearance, even the way we present ourselves to the world. This sense of control fosters a deep illusion, the belief that we are entirely self-sufficient, that our success, happiness, and fulfillment are within our own hands, and that we do not need to rely on anything or anyone else. However, this illusion of self-sufficiency is both misleading and ultimately harmful. While it is important to cultivate a sense of independence and responsibility, there is a profound danger in forgetting the deeper truths of our existence. Truths that remind us that we are not self-made, that we are not isolated islands, and that our lives are interwoven with the lives of others, with nature, and with forces greater than ourselves. The first step toward recognizing the truth about self-sufficiency is to acknowledge that our very existence is dependent on a multitude of factors outside of our control. Consider for a moment the sheer complexity of human life. Our ability to think, to feel, to move, to reason. These are not qualities that we have created or brought about by our own effort. We are born into the world with these capacities, gifts we have received without merit. We did not choose our parents, our heritage, or the environment in which we were raised. We did not choose the time and place of our birth, nor the culture and circumstances that shaped our early development. Even the very air we breathe, the food we consume, and the warmth of the sun, these are all gifts beyond our control. The illusion of self-sufficiency arises when we fail to acknowledge this vast network of interdependence. We begin to think of ourselves as isolated individuals, acting independently of the world around us, when in reality our lives are intricately connected to a web of relationships and dependencies that we did not create. The next layer of this illusion arises when we look at our material accomplishments, our career successes, our academic achievements, our financial independence, and begin to attribute these entirely to our own efforts. While it is true that hard work, perseverance, and personal initiative play a significant role in shaping our lives, we must never forget that we are also deeply reliant on the support, encouragement, and opportunities provided by others. We rely on teachers, mentors, colleagues, and family members who have guided us, supported us, and opened doors for us. We are part of a larger social fabric that enables our individual successes to take shape. Even the greatest achievements in life are rarely the result of solitary effort. They are the fruits of collaboration, of being in the right place at the right time, of benefiting from the wisdom and resources of others. To believe that we have done it all ourselves is to ignore the complex network of help, support, and grace that surrounds us at every turn. Moreover, the idea of self-sufficiency becomes even more tenuous when we consider the deeper, intangible aspects of life, those things that cannot be quantified or controlled, yet which give life its true meaning. Our emotional well-being, our capacity for love, our sense of purpose, our moral compass. None of these are the result of our own self-sufficiency. They are shaped by our relationships with others, our engagement with the world around us, and, for many, by a higher power. These intangible aspects of life are not merely products of individual effort. They are gifts that we receive, often without understanding their full significance. It is easy to fall into the trap of believing that we can control our own happiness or moral direction, but this belief often leads to disappointment and emptiness. When we try to manufacture our sense of worth from our own accomplishments alone, we neglect the truth that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. The pursuit of happiness, meaning, and fulfillment is not a solo endeavor. It requires humility, vulnerability, and an openness to something beyond our own capacities. Furthermore, the illusion of self-sufficiency feeds into the false notion of control over life's uncertainties. We cannot control the future, and we cannot dictate the course of events beyond our own immediate actions. Unexpected challenges arise: health crises, financial downturns, personal losses, or natural disasters that remind us how fragile and vulnerable our lives truly are. These events can shake the foundations of our perceived self-sufficiency, forcing us to confront the reality that no matter how much we plan, prepare, or strive, we are not in complete control of our lives. This is a humbling and, at times, painful realization. But it is also an opportunity for growth. When we come face to face with our limitations, we are presented with the chance to open our hearts to others, to seek help when needed, and to recognize that life's true strength lies not in the illusion of self-sufficiency, but in our capacity for interdependence and compassion. Stoicism. In spiritual terms, the belief in self-sufficiency is a barrier to the recognition of our need for God. Many of us, particularly in secular societies, are conditioned to believe that we can achieve everything through our own efforts. Yet, no matter how skilled, talented, or industrious we may be, we are ultimately finite beings, dependent on divine grace for our existence and our salvation. The more we elevate our own abilities and accomplishments, the more we distance ourselves from the recognition that we are creatures of a higher purpose. The illusion of self-sufficiency creates a spiritual blindness, blinding us to the truth that we were created by a loving Creator who desires to guide, support, and sustain us. He expands us and guides us. He expands us and sustains us. The antidote to this illusion is humility. Humility recognizes that while we have responsibilities and duties, we are not self-made. We acknowledge our dependence on others, on the world around us, and on the divine forces that guide our lives. Humility invites us to embrace our limitations, to be open to help, and to recognize that true fulfillment does not come from the idolization of self-sufficiency, but from a life lived in relationship with others, with the world, and with God. In conclusion, the illusion of self-sufficiency is one of the most pervasive and damaging falsehoods we can believe. While independence and self-reliance have their rightful place, they must not blind us to the deeper truths of our dependence on others and on the divine. It is in recognizing our interdependence, in accepting help, and in embracing our vulnerability that we find the true strength to navigate the complexities of life. Self-sufficiency, when taken to an extreme, cuts us off from the very sources of support, grace, and wisdom that sustain us. Let us therefore cultivate humility, acknowledging our dependence, and embracing the richer, more meaningful life that comes from living in connection with the world and with the divine. Pride is a deeply rooted force within the human heart. It is the insidious belief that we are the measure of all things, that we are superior to others, and that we are ultimately the masters of our own fate. When we exalt the flesh, whether it be through an overemphasis on physical beauty, intellectual prowess, or material success, pride naturally follows. We begin to perceive ourselves as independent of others, as self-sufficient, and, most dangerously, as deserving of special recognition and adoration. This is a dangerous place to be because pride blinds us to the truth of our own limitations, our dependence on others, and the presence of a higher power that calls us to humility. Pride feeds on the illusion of superiority. When we elevate our flesh, our physical appearance, our accomplishments, or our worldly possessions, we inevitably start to compare ourselves to others. We look at those around us and we begin to measure ourselves against them. I am better, we might think. I am smarter, more capable, more attractive, or more successful. This is the breeding ground for pride, a subtle yet powerful distortion of the truth. It is the very nature of pride to create an artificial hierarchy where we see ourselves standing above others, even if we do so unconsciously. We may not always express it outwardly, but in our hearts, we start to believe that we are somehow deserving of more respect, more attention, and more admiration than the people around us. We become consumed with the desire for recognition, and the more we receive, the more we crave. This self-centered mentality is dangerous for several reasons. First, pride creates division between people. When we perceive ourselves as superior, we inadvertently distance ourselves from those who we think are beneath us. This leads to isolation, judgment, and even cruelty. We may look down on others for their lack of accomplishments, their physical appearance, or their perceived weaknesses. The more we exalt our own flesh, the less we are able to see the inherent worth in others, and the less we are able to love them as equals. In essence, pride builds walls where there should be bridges, creating rifts in our relationships with those around us. Second, pride leads us into self-deception. When we exalt ourselves, we begin to lose sight of the fact that every gift we possess, be it our talents, our intelligence, or our opportunities, is ultimately a gift. It is easy to forget that our abilities and our successes are not solely the result of our own efforts. We are part of a vast and complex web of relationships and circumstances that have shaped us. Our talents may be the fruit of years of education and practice, but they are also the result of a supportive community, of mentors, of teachers, and of circumstances that have enabled us to succeed. To elevate ourselves above others is to ignore the larger context in which our lives unfold. It blinds us to the role that others have played in our development and, most importantly, it blinds us to the divine guidance that sustains us. The more we exalt our flesh, the more we forget the truth of our dependence on others and on God. The problem with pride is that it becomes a kind of spiritual blindness. When we are consumed with our own importance, we can no longer see our own faults, our own weaknesses, or our own sins. We become arrogant, unable to acknowledge that we have flaws that need to be addressed. This leads to a distorted sense of self, one that is far removed from reality. The proud individual becomes so consumed with the need to maintain their image of superiority that they cannot recognize their own need for growth, humility, and repentance. It is in this blindness that pride often leads to greater isolation and spiritual decay. A person trapped in pride is unable to seek help, unable to ask for forgiveness, and unable to recognize that they are not as self-sufficient as they believe. And they turn to asking the question, is anyone here forgiving? Is anyone here to recognize that they are not as self-sufficient as they believe? Furthermore, pride fosters a lack of gratitude. When we exalt ourselves, we often take credit for everything we have achieved, forgetting that much of what we have is a gift. Pride tells us that we deserve everything we have and more. It leads us to forget that we are mere stewards of the gifts we have received. Pride robs us of the ability to appreciate the people and circumstances that have helped us along the way, and most of all, it robs us of gratitude toward God, who is the giver of all good things. When we are consumed with pride, we fail to recognize that everything we possess, our talents, our wealth, our relationships, even our very lives, are ultimately blessings, not entitlements. At its core, pride also stifles spiritual growth. When we elevate our flesh and our own abilities, we close the door to the transformative power of humility. True spiritual growth cannot occur in an environment where we are focused on our own greatness. Humility, on the other hand, opens the door to true transformation. When we recognize that we are not the ultimate authority in our lives, that we do not have all the answers, and that we are dependent on something greater than ourselves, we create space for spiritual growth. Humility allows us to be open to the guidance of others, to learn from our mistakes, and to be molded by God's grace. Pride, on the other hand, traps us in a stagnant cycle where we are unwilling to change, to repent, or to be shaped by the truth. The destructive power of pride can be seen throughout history. Many great leaders, rulers, and thinkers have fallen prey to their own pride, believing that their intellect, power, or position made them infallible. This hubris often leads to their downfall. History is replete with examples of individuals who, in exalting their own importance, lost sight of the common good, of justice, and of humility. The common good, of justice, and of humility. They became tyrants, oppressors, and self-absorbed figures, and their pride ultimately led to their undoing. In the Bible, the story of King Nebuchadnezzar is a stark example of pride's consequences. He was humbled by God after exalting himself above all others, leading to his temporary fall into madness. His story serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of exalting oneself above others and of the need for humility. Ultimately, pride is a barrier to true happiness. It prevents us from finding contentment in who we truly are, and it keeps us focused on what we do, how we look, and what others think of us. The more we exalt our flesh, the more we seek validation from external sources, and the less we find satisfaction in the inner peace that comes from humility and gratitude. When we let go of pride and recognize that we are not the center of the universe, we open ourselves up to the fullness of life, a life rich in relationships, purpose, and spiritual depth. In conclusion, pride is a dangerous force that warps our understanding of ourselves and others. It leads to self-deception, spiritual blindness, isolation, and a lack of gratitude. When we exalt our flesh and place ourselves above others, we lose sight of the truth that we are all interconnected, dependent on one another, and reliant on divine grace. Humility, on the other hand, opens the door to true growth, gratitude, and spiritual fulfillment. Let us therefore guard against pride, recognize our dependence on others, and seek the humility that allows us to live in accordance with our higher calling. To exalt our flesh, we often forget that the pursuit of fleeting pleasures can never bring lasting fulfillment. The human desire for pleasure, comfort, and satisfaction is an integral part of our nature. These desires are not inherently wrong. They are part of what it means to be human, and yet somehow it feels grievous that some people get to revel in them, and that we predictably. However, when these desires take precedence over everything else, when we allow them to dominate our decisions and shape our priorities, we enter into a cycle of temporary satisfaction that leaves us feeling empty and unfulfilled. The pursuit of fleeting pleasures ultimately becomes a never-ending chase, one that distracts us from the deeper, more meaningful aspects of life. In the modern world, we are constantly surrounded by opportunities for instant gratification. Technology, consumerism, entertainment, and even food are all designed to offer immediate pleasure and convenience. These temptations can be overwhelming, and the constant barrage of stimuli often convinces us that the pursuit of pleasure is the highest good. We are conditioned to believe that the ultimate goal in life is to seek out and experience as much pleasure as possible, to avoid discomfort at all costs, and to indulge in whatever makes us feel good in the moment. However, the problem with this pursuit is that it is, by nature, short-lived. The pleasure we experience from indulging in worldly desires is fleeting. Take, for example, the satisfaction we feel from eating a delicious meal, purchasing a new item, or watching a captivating movie. These pleasures are real, but they are also temporary. Once the meal is over, the item loses its novelty, and the movie ends, leaving us with a sense of longing or emptiness. The problem lies not in the enjoyment of these things, but in our tendency to elevate them as the ultimate goal, as if they are the key to lasting happiness. In sensuousness, this constant search for temporary satisfaction leads to what many philosophers and spiritual thinkers have described as a hedonistic treadmill. The hedonistic treadmill is the cycle of constantly seeking out new pleasures, only to find that each new pleasure offers less fulfillment than the last. As we indulge in these fleeting satisfactions, we become accustomed to them, and our desire for greater pleasure grows. This is why many philosophers explain how life itself is hell in triumph, so much so that suffering can no longer be described as pain. We begin to seek more and more intense experiences, but the joy we derive from them continues to diminish. Eventually, the pursuit of pleasure becomes a hollow and unending chase, one that leaves us spiritually bankrupt. This cycle of temporary pleasure-seeking is especially pronounced in a world where instant gratification is so readily available. We live in a society where technology, social media, and consumer culture are designed to feed our desires and distract us from deeper, more meaningful pursuits. The constant stream of notifications, advertisements, and entertainment choices creates a sense of urgency and excitement that keeps us constantly engaged in the pursuit of immediate satisfaction. The more we seek out these distractions, the less we are able to focus on the things that truly matter, the relationships we cultivate, the work we do, and the spiritual growth we pursue. The pursuit of fleeting pleasures also undermines our sense of true contentment. True contentment comes not from the accumulation of material goods or the constant pursuit of pleasure, but from the ability to find joy and peace in the present moment, regardless of external circumstances. When we are constantly chasing after the next source of pleasure, we fail to appreciate the richness of life as it is. Let alone the richness of life as it is. We miss the beauty of the small, everyday moments, the quiet conversation with a friend, the joy of helping someone in need, the sense of fulfillment that comes from working toward a long-term goal. These moments, though less immediately stimulating than the pursuit of pleasure, offer a deeper and more lasting form of fulfillment. Moreover, the pursuit of fleeting pleasures often leads us to neglect our responsibilities and commitments. When we prioritize our own desires over everything else, we may find ourselves neglecting important relationships, opportunities for growth, or the pursuit of meaningful goals. The pursuit of pleasure can become an all-consuming force, one that blinds us to our higher calling and the responsibilities we have toward others. In seeking only what satisfies us in the moment, we lose sight of the long-term fulfillment that comes from contributing to the well-being of others and living a life of purpose and meaning. The danger of exalting fleeting pleasures is not only that they fail to satisfy us in the long run, but also that they can lead to greater suffering and emptiness. As we continually seek pleasure, we may become increasingly disillusioned when our desires are not fully met. The dissatisfaction that arises from this constant chasing after pleasure can lead to frustration, anxiety, and a sense of inner emptiness. We may find ourselves feeling hollow, as if something is missing from our lives, even though we have everything we thought we wanted. The inability to find lasting satisfaction in fleeting pleasures can leave us feeling unmoored and disconnected from the deeper sources of meaning and fulfillment. True fulfillment, on the other hand, comes from the pursuit of something greater than ourselves. It comes from living a life that is not centered on immediate gratification, but on long-term growth, service, and connection. When we focus on things that bring lasting meaning, such as our relationships with others, our work, and our spiritual journey, we discover a form of fulfillment that transcends the temporary pleasures of the flesh. This does not mean that we should abandon all forms of enjoyment, but rather that we should not allow pleasure to become the guiding principle of our lives. True fulfillment comes when we understand that there is more to life than the pursuit of fleeting satisfaction, and when we learn to find joy in the things that truly matter. If we do so, joy is everything. The shift away from the pursuit of fleeting pleasures toward a more meaningful and fulfilling life requires a fundamental change in perspective. It requires us to look beyond the immediate and the superficial and to focus on the deeper, more enduring sources of joy. It means recognizing that true happiness is not found in what we consume, but in how we give, how we serve others, how we grow as individuals, and how we connect with the world around us. It also means recognizing that our greatest source of fulfillment comes not from the flesh, but from the spirit, the part of us that seeks something greater than the material, something eternal and unchanging. In conclusion, the pursuit of fleeting pleasures, when elevated to the highest goal, leads us into a cycle of temporary satisfaction that ultimately leaves us unfulfilled. The constant search for more pleasure, more comfort, and more indulgence becomes a hollow pursuit, one that distracts us from the deeper, more meaningful aspects of life. True fulfillment comes not from the pursuit of immediate gratification, but from the cultivation of relationships, personal growth, and spiritual depth. By shifting our focus away from fleeting pleasures and toward lasting meaning, we can find the true satisfaction that eludes us when we exalt the flesh. The tendency to forget our true identity when we exalt the flesh is perhaps one of the most profound pitfalls of modern life. In a world that constantly urges us to define ourselves by our appearance, our accomplishments, and our material possessions, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize who we truly are beneath these external layers. Influences, influencers, 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 influencers. When we focus solely on exalting the flesh, we risk losing touch with the deeper essence of our being. The soul that is meant to seek purpose, meaning, and connection with something far greater than the temporary and fleeting aspects of life. We begin to mistake the superficial for the substantial, the transient for the eternal, and in doing so, we lose sight of our true purpose and our true self. The first danger of exalting the flesh is that it causes us to identify ourselves primarily with what is visible and external, rather than with the invisible, spiritual aspects of our nature. We live in a society that constantly reinforces the idea that who we are is determined by what others see: our appearance, our success, our possessions. These become the markers by which we measure our worth. Human nature is trained to be associated with our appearance, yet if we rely solely on these external factors to define our identity, we risk neglecting the most important part of who we are: the inner self, the soul, and the spirit that shapes our character, values, and beliefs. When we base our identity on external things, we become vulnerable to the whims of societal standards and the ever-changing nature of the world. Our value becomes contingent on things that can be taken away. Our looks may fade with age, our accomplishments may be eclipsed by others, and our possessions may lose their allure or become obsolete. If our sense of self is anchored in these things, then our identity becomes fragile and easily shaken. We are left constantly chasing after validation, constantly needing to prove our worth to others, and always measuring our value by the standards of a world that is fickle and transient. The constant search for external validation can create a deep sense of insecurity as we struggle to maintain an identity that is dependent on the superficial. Furthermore, when we exalt the flesh, we can become obsessed with self-preservation and self-promotion, constantly striving to protect and elevate our public image. We begin to put on masks to hide our true selves, presenting to the world only what we think will be accepted and admired. This leads to a disconnection from our authentic selves, as we are no longer living in alignment with who we truly are, but rather with who we think we should be. The more we focus on exalting the flesh, the more we lose sight of the inner truth that lies beneath the surface. We stop living from a place of genuine self-acknowledge and start living from a place of societal expectations and external pressures. This obsession with the external is not just about appearances. It extends to our achievements and possessions. We begin to measure our worth by the titles we hold, the accolades we accumulate, or the material wealth we possess. While there is nothing inherently wrong with success or wealth, the problem arises when we begin to define ourselves exclusively through these things. Our worth becomes tied to what we have accomplished or acquired, and we lose sight of the deeper, more lasting sources of fulfillment that are not defined by external circumstances. The danger lies in the fact that these external markers of success are often temporary and ultimately shallow. They do not define the essence of who we are as human beings, nor do they reflect our ultimate purpose in life. As we exalt the flesh through our appearance, our achievements, or our material possessions, we risk distancing ourselves from the true sources of fulfillment that lie in our relationships, our inner growth, and our connection to a higher power. When we focus solely on the physical or material aspects of life, we neglect the deeper dimensions of the human experience, those that are not measurable by external standards, but are in fact the most meaningful and enduring. It is in our relationships with others, in our capacity for love, in our pursuit of truth and wisdom, and in our connection to something greater than ourselves that we find the true meaning of our existence. H.G. Moreover, exalting the flesh fosters a sense of self-centeredness that further distances us from our true identity. The more we focus on our own needs, desires, and ambitions, the less we are able to see beyond ourselves and connect with the world around us. We become obsessed with our own image, constantly seeking validation and approval from others, and as a result, we become blind to the needs, struggles, and aspirations of those around us. This self-centeredness can create a deep sense of loneliness and isolation, as we are no longer living in community with others, but rather are caught up in a never-ending cycle of self-promotion and self-interest. True fulfillment and meaning in life do not come from the exaltation of the flesh, but from recognizing our deeper identity as beings created for a purpose. When we begin to shift our focus away from the external and toward the internal, we are able to rediscover our true self. Our identity is not defined by the way we look, the things we own, or the achievements we accumulate. It is defined by our character, our values, our relationships, and our connection to the divine. When we cease to identify ourselves with the superficial aspects of life and instead look inward, we can begin to cultivate a sense of peace and fulfillment that is not dependent on the ever-changing tides of external circumstances. At the core of our true identity is the realization that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, something eternal and unchanging. Whether one views this from a religious or spiritual perspective, the recognition of our place within the grand scheme of the universe is humbling and liberating. When we let go of the need to exalt the flesh and begin to embrace our true identity and purpose, we are able to live with greater authenticity and freedom. In the process, it reassures us that we are not alone, and we no longer need to chase after fleeting forms of validation or success. Instead, we are content in the knowledge that we are loved and valued for who we are, not for what we have or what we do. In this sense, recognizing and embracing our true identity is the key to unlocking a life of genuine fulfillment. It frees us from the constant pressure to measure up to external standards, and instead allows us to live in alignment with our highest values and deepest aspirations. Finally, when we focus on nurturing our inner life, cultivating meaningful relationships, and pursuing our spiritual and personal growth, we begin to experience a sense of peace and purpose that is far more enduring than the fleeting pleasures of exalting the flesh. Our true identity is found not in the external world, but in the depth of our hearts and souls, where we are called to live out our highest potential and to connect with the divine source of all life. In conclusion, when we exalt the flesh, we risk losing touch with our true identity. We become fixated on external markers of worth, our appearance, our accomplishments, and our possessions, while neglecting the deeper, more lasting aspects of who we truly are. By shifting our focus away from the superficial and toward the inner dimensions of life, we can rediscover our true self and live with greater authenticity, peace, and purpose. Our true identity is not defined by the fleeting pleasures and achievements of the flesh, but by the love, wisdom, and connection we cultivate within ourselves and with others. It is through this deeper understanding of who we are that we can live a life of true fulfillment and meaning.